Okay, hello everyone. It is 4 o'clock. This is the second edition of our webinar series. Our presenter today will be Kevin MacDermott, Senior Associate Director at Craftsbury and Head Coach of Trinity College Men's Rowing since 2009 and has been at Craftsbury since 2003. Kevin is one of our regular head coaches and also a very talented improv performer. And his most recent project was the completion of voicing an audiobook for Trinity College called The Bantam Oar, the story of rowing at Trinity College. So a few more people are joining and I will admit them and then we will let Kevin get started. Okay. All right. Kevin, it's all yours.
Great. Well, thank you, Troy. And also thank you to Erica Sloan, our fleet manager, who is a technical whiz, non-Periel on all of this stuff and allowing Troy and I to do these first two webinars. So thank you to Erica. And again, Troy, thank you for the opportunity to run this. This is a blast. I see on like of the 140 people, I don't know, probably 100 that I've coached at Craftsbury. So it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and familiar names. Those who I don't know, Craftsbury friends, it's wonderful to see you. I'm sorry, this is the format that we're engaging with each other, but hope that this is an informative 45 minutes or so and that the topics we cover are of interest to you and that you leave with something that you didn't have when you came. So I've prepared a very basic PowerPoint presentation and should be sharing my screen here now. When Troy asked me to do this webinar, I asked kind of the parameters of it, what the intention was, what the scope, and also kind of what he hoped we would get out of this. And one of the points that he made was that he wanted the presentations that we normally give at camp to our head coaches to try and translate those to the webinar format. So for those of you who've been to camp and have experienced the Friday or Sunday night head coach video session, have experienced some of our on-campus seminars, the presentation on things I wished I knew earlier, things, seminars like that. This talk, I hope it kind of mirrors those on-campus presentations. So the title that I gave for this is Reframing Your Outlook. This is largely based on my sculling through the past 3.5 to 4 months. It was very sad and very unfortunate for my team that our season was canceled. We, in mid-March, met with our athletic director to be told that our season was over. Understandably and prudently, that decision was made. It freed up my mornings. We typically practice as a team from 5:30 until about 8:30 a.m. All of a sudden, I had months ahead of me where I didn't have a team to coach. So was in the very fortunate position that I still run the boathouse, still had access to the boathouse, and was really the only one going to the boathouse, but was able to scull more than I have in years. Without the team to coach, those mornings, 5 to 6 days a week, was able to do 90 and 2-hour sessions that I feel very fortunate to be able to have that time and that opportunity to get on the water. That time on the water provided me a lot of time to think about what I was doing and ways that I might improve how my boat is moving, how I'm experiencing my time on the water. I will add that this is also very much informed by nearly 20 years at Craftsbury, a lot of common conversations, common questions that come up at camps, and also the private coaching and private tutoring that I do, private lessons, that I do in the Hartford area. So without further ado, there are 13 different points that I would like to present and just talk through a little bit for hopefully some improvements or some adjustments maybe to how you approach sculling. This first one, for anybody who has seen my Friday or Sunday night video reviews for the last 10 years, this is a very familiar one. When I first get on the water, meaning like for the season, so in March or April or whenever I'm able to first get on the water, this is a kind of a self-examination that I go through before I get on the water, and I have helped or offered it rather as a framing for people's experience at Craftsbury. I want to be very realistic and honest with myself about where I am and how my current set of circumstances is going to inform my sculling so that I avoid unrealistic expectations. This first bullet point here of trying to examine my fitness. My enjoyment in the boat and my sensation of movement is largely informed by how physically fit I feel. When I am not able to train or am feeling not quite, physically prepared, the boat really suffers. So if I'm honest about that, I don't get hung up on it. If I'm feeling like I have a good training period, I'm feeling strong, then I have a different parameter to enter the boat, a different kind of mindset. But if I get in the boat and I'm not physically prepared to do the things that I want to do, I think just a dose of reality can really make it more enjoyable. If I am not realistic, I usually am kind of disappointed with how I'm moving the boat. This second bullet point of frequency is being realistic and honest about how often I'm getting in the boat, how often I'm getting on the water. I do private lessons, have done private lessons with a woman in the Hartford area for about 5 years now. And last summer, she expressed a lot of frustration with her speed and her kind of reaching her goals. Long story short, in conversation, she was only getting on the water 2 days a week, where the previous summer, she was getting on the water 4 days a week. That makes a huge difference. She just didn't do the kind of simple connection that the regularity of getting on the water informs how much progress you make. It seems like a very self-evident point, but often one that we kind of ignore or overlook. And then this third point of familiarity. Rowing is a lifelong sport. Sculling is a lifelong sport, which is fantastic and one of the draws, I think, for many people. If you are in your first month, if you are in your first year, if you are in your first decade, you will have a very different relationship with the sport. I began in 1993, so 27 years in. I feel very different in my connection to the boat, my familiarity with the water than I did 10 years ago. I think people are oftentimes unrealistic in their expectations because we want things to happen quickly. So oftentimes, and I think Troy can echo this sentiment, we'll have people who are at Craftsbury who may be in their first year of sculling. They are looking at people who are in their 10th year of sculling and comparing themselves to that individual, which I think is a mistake. And one, hopefully, if we are critical and self-examine, we can set good parameters for ourselves, excuse me. This second, before I get on the water, I do a self-check of how I'm feeling. And especially the last 2 months, this has been a very important one for me. I'm not, just in general, this has been a very challenging time for everybody. Mentally, emotionally, physically, it's, months on end of really challenging and overwhelming for some people times. When I get on the water, this first bullet point, I do a self-check of like how I'm feeling. And it may seem simple. I am a stupid optimist, but when I have enthusiasm and energy going into a session, it's usually a good one. If I'm dragging ass and I'm feeling down and I'm feeling, I don't know, angry or uptight or whatever negative emotion, that session is usually pretty lousy. So this was our team mantra for the 2017-18 season, that your attitude determines your outcome. So for guys getting on the water, I would ask them to really do an assessment of like, where are you mentally? Where are you emotionally? Can we muster just some stupid enthusiasm for this exercise or this piece or this practice? And when guys really committed to it, almost invariably, it comes out with a pretty positive outcome. The second point is, I forget where I read it, but I came across this little idiom a while back, and it has improved my practices tremendously. If you carry a big basket, you'll always bring something home. We do a debrief after every practice, whether it's with a private lesson or with the team, and then I try to do a self kind of debrief, I guess, after each of my sessions. And I find that the more expansive my my kind of openness is, the more expansive I am in what I try to accept from my row, the better it is, and the better the subsequent sculling sessions are after that. So I can always find something that went well. I can always find something that I improved. I can always find something that I need to improve more for the next time. So for those two, I do that little checklist evaluation before I get on the water. And then finally, before I even get to the boathouse or set foot, I make sure I have a plan. I found myself, really, this was like late April and early May, just heading to the boathouse and going out on the water. You may find yourself in this situation as well if you're able to get on the water or you're getting on an erg. You may just go down there without a plan outlined. I was able to scull for about a month with a Trinity alumna, Christina Preto, who is part of the Vesper high performance group, and they had closed down, so she was in the Hartford area and we were rowing singles together. So I just did Vesper high performance group workouts for like 3 weeks, and it was a blast. Christina came to the boathouse and she would send the warm up, kind of a technical drill work goal for the day, the intervals we were doing, the volume we had to do, the cool down, and I was presented with a packaged workout, which I typically create 100 of those a year. To be given it, to execute it, it was wonderful. Having that plan gave structure, organization, and then I think real efficacy to our workout. I've listed here two guys who you may know these names. They're both, Larry is still a Craftsbury coach. He is a national team coach, coaching legend. I had the pleasure and honor of working for Larry for 3 years as his assistant coach. And when he would script workouts, he would do minute by minute breakdown. I mean, literally, like the first 10 minutes of practice broken down in minute by minute intervals. And he would do that for the entire 80 or 90 or 100-minute session. Norm, who was the director of Craftsbury for the better part of a decade, he would have 3 blocks for every practice and would have on an index card a objective for every single block. Block 1 was your warm-up and usually your drill work. Block 2 was your interval or your workout for the day. Block 3 was your cool down and your kind of row back to the dock. So I think I fall somewhere in between, where I want to have order and structure, set up in place, and I find my sessions having a lot more productivity to them when I do. So those are my kind of three thoughts on framing my efforts before I even get on the water. If there are any questions on any of those, Erica is going through questions in the group chat, so you can message her rather through the chat. Now, as I get on the water, I have a couple of more mental preparation and setting myself up to have a good SCULL ideas or thoughts. This first one is 100% Craftsbury informed. Through 17 years of coaching up there, people get very, very precious about their sculling, and they often get very myopic about their sculling. Individual strokes, individual piece, a section of 10 strokes, where they will start to fixate on their performance through a very narrow lens. I try to avoid being precious about any sculling that I do. And I also, I don't want to apologize or beat myself up. I recently taught my niece to SCULL. She's 14 years old, wonderful athlete. We had a wonderful time learning how to SCULL over 3 different sessions. By the 3rd session, we were moving pretty well. She's a very talented young woman, young athlete. And every 30 strokes or 40 strokes, she would take a real clunker, would really dig, take a bad stroke, and reflexively, she apologized. And I was like, you got to stop that. There's no need, no reason, but she just reflexively apologized. I then ran a private lesson about 3 or 4 days later, and that private client continued to apologize for taking bad strokes. I was like, is it me? Like, I don't know. I try to have a very, positive attitude about what we're trying to do. But they just were like, ooh, that one stroke was bad. Who cares? Take the next one well. But it's just this common theme that whether it's my niece, that private client, or people at Craftsbury, just very, very unduly hard on themselves. This second point, I'm going to take a little bit of time to go through. Being patient, and I mean this, and I reference a lot of what Troy talked about in his webinar last week. Being patient when you're trying to assess how you're moving and how technical changes are taking place. People will oftentimes try something different and then will make an assessment like 5 strokes later or 10 strokes later. Sculling, and whether it's good or bad, maybe they say, oh yeah, that feels great. Or they say, oh no, I don't like that. That feels uncomfortable. You have to allow time to be uncomfortable and to feel a little weird. And people oftentimes are not willing, and myself included, not willing to do that. Rowing and sculling, the system is a composite of interdependent variables. As soon as you switch one of those variables, you make a change at the release, or you make a change with your drive mechanics, the entire system is altered. And you have to allow time for the system to recalibrate and to adjust. That takes patience. Again, patience that I oftentimes don't have, that clients or attendees at Craftsbury don't have. Within that system, one change impacts everything else. So give yourself time, be patient, and, allow it to adjust and kind of reach an equilibrium then make an assessment. Coaching a college team, this is brutally difficult. Guys are so eager to make an assessment immediately, and you have to just preach and push and enforce patience, which we oftentimes don't have. This third point here on removing some of our preciousness about our sculling is inspired by Ellen Braithwaite, who's a dear friend and colleague at Craftsbury, who most of the year does open water sculling in the San Francisco Bay area. Sausalito, I believe, is one of her home clubs. And learning about open water sculling and being inspired by Ellen and her experience there has really, I think, allowed me to find more flexibility and forgiveness in my sculling. In open water sculling, the variables of water and wind change dramatically. When we're rowing on flat water, a lake up at Craftsbury or the Connecticut River in Hartford, the variables are far more narrow, but they still are ever changing. The Connecticut River has a mean current, and this time of year it has a very tricky tidal influence. I want to be inspired by Ellen and recognize that no two strokes will ever be the same. The water, the wind, the alchemy of ingredients will never be repeated. So embracing that and taking each stroke individually, I find a lot of joy in that and enjoyment. This next one, kind of moving on to a couple more technical points and maybe more biomechanical points within the shell. So this first one, very important, the first time that I get into a boat, and subsequently the first few moments every time that I get in a boat thereafter. Pay more attention to your handle. I think that the handle, in terms of looking at people sculling at Craftsbury, is usually a major cause of problems. And as soon as someone can connect to the handle with more ease and dexterity, it can be the solution to a lot of sculling problems. Spend more time connecting to it. I've written here baseball, softball bats. I'm thinking of Joe DiMaggio. And if anybody knows, Joe DiMaggio, the hitting streak, but Joe DiMaggio used to custom order his bats. He would dip them in olive oil. He would sprinkle kind of a rosin material on it. He would put it over a flame. He would sand it down, his handle, and would spend days preparing his bats. This elaborate process. Tennis rackets, Rod Laver, one of the greatest tennis players ever, would obsessively wrap and rewrap his handles until it was just so and just perfect. Rowers, we usually grab whatever's there. We may experiment with a different grip here or there or a different diameter for the handle, but oftentimes the coach assigns you an oar or you pick an oar and you use it. Spend more time engaging with the handle. This name, Colin Toohey, that I've listed next, he was the stroke seat of a very fine crew that I had the pleasure of coaching in 2010. He was a Henley finalist, San Diego crew champion, great oarsman. One day I just watched Colin. He was in the stroke seat, and he was, this was in a sweep boat, but he was just kind of like very thoughtfully and kind of almost like, it was just a very like delicate kind of touch on his oar between pieces. We were doing 500-meter intervals, and he just kind of was like really looking at it thoughtfully. And I made mention of it. And he said, "Well, coach, it's my only connection to the water." And he said it as though almost like he was I don't know, like a soldier, and he's like, this is my only connection to home, or like, do you have any idea how important this is to me? And I had never thought about it in those terms. But for him, and I think I try and adopt this as much as possible, that handle is the connection to the water by extension. So giving more thought to it, I think can improve everybody's sculling significantly. This next point on the water, number 4, is informed by my educational background. I was a theater major in college, and in our training in acting and being directed, you would be encouraged to explore the space. And this may be a familiar concept or something that people have engaged with, but you, maybe a set is, a show is already staged and the set is already up, and you explore and make the space your own. You live in it, you explore it. I encourage people to spend more time quietly being in their boat. Troy covered a lot of this last week when he discussed comfort in the boat exercises. So I don't want to belabor that end of it, but his talk was wonderful and comprehensive in this regard. Expanding your comfort and ability to move within the shell with those exercises. I'm honored that I was an inspiration for some of them, and have been inspired by Troy's demonstrations, Brian Direct's demonstrations, and others who have done those exercises. I would encourage people also to give more thought to how they move in the boat for very basic movements. We had a camper last year who flipped while trying to get their water bottle. That's fine. I'm not being critical of that. We had a boy in the fall who flipped in a single while he was trying to take off his top, a long sleeve top. I've seen people nearly flip as they're trying to adjust their foot stretchers. So those kind of basic movements in the boat, they may seem like novice-y day one type of topics. I don't think they are. Think about how you move in the boat, explore and contemplate, and take as much care as possible to be inside the shell with as much comfort as possible. This next point, I hope, kind of dovetails with that previous one, where I encourage, and I have tried to execute, I do simple drills.
Kevin, if I may interject for just a moment, there's a request that you read the point that you're making on the PowerPoint as you,
Sure.
just before you address it.
Yes, sure. Sure, yes. Try simple drills. Oh, because some people can't see the screen. I'm sorry. Yes, of course. I'm sorry. Thank you. Try simple drills, understand their purpose, and execute with precision. In my experience, people oftentimes don't understand why they're doing a drill. One of my favorite exercises at the many high school camps that I coach during the summer, in a typical summer, is to ask high school athletes why they do the pick drill or why they do pause drills. Sometimes the athletes will come up with some reason, but typically it's because their coach told them to do them or because they read about them in some book. I really encourage people to understand the purpose of an exercise. Perhaps this is, Troy, worthy of exploration in a later webinar of going through the efficacy of various drill work. People oftentimes do drills mindlessly. They'll do them just for the movement or just for the sake of doing it. They'll do drills that they've been told to do, but don't feel any personal connection to improving their sculling. And I really feel strongly that if you take the most simple, basic building blocks of drills, really think about why you want to use that drill, and then execute it regularly with thought and precision, you can improve your sessions tremendously. I wrote this pick drill. I have been starting every single session by doing what I call the release end pick drill, which is ubiquitous, just arms only, arms and body, and then slowly incorporating the slide. But I try to do it very thoughtfully and very slowly, and I do feel like it has improved my sculling a lot. So instead of getting complex with your drills, instead of getting a menu of 15 or 20 different drills, pick a couple, really know what they're for, and execute them with the greatest level of precision. And I think that avoids some common mistakes where people do them mindlessly, they do too many drills, and they don't understand why they're doing them. Next, focus on the movement of your joints. Again, for those of you who've seen my presentations at camp on a Friday or Sunday night, this one is familiar to you. Most rowing coaches and athletes focus on muscles. And I'm not offering that I have some different view of anatomy. I understand how muscles connect to bones and joints and all. When I think of movement in the boat, I don't think about my muscles. I think about my joints. So, for example, I've written in the third point, leg drive versus knee extension. So, super common for building the drive sequence. A coach will say, drive your legs, or leg drive, you know, engage the quads, engage your glutes. All of that, I understand. I get, I've said all of those things too. Maybe it was 2014, so 6 years ago, I thought of lifting. And our lifting coach at Trinity doesn't talk about muscles. He talks about joint movement. So in the boat, inspired by that, I didn't think of leg drive. I thought of knee extension. And as soon as I did that, that reframing of how my body is moving through the drive, it really changed my feeling in the boat very positively. I can see my knee. For some reason in my brain, it works better to think about my knee extending as instead of, you know, saying the same thing for leg drive. And I encourage you to think about ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, elbow, wrist at some point when you're on the erg or when you're in the boat. Instead of, you know, you may have a idea in your head of how your quads or how your chest or how your biceps work. I would offer, think maybe instead of how your knee and your hip and your shoulder and your elbow function in sequence. This idea is also very much informed by the Trinity track and field coach, who I went out with him one day and was watching the throwers, their shot putters and hammer throwers, and then the javelin. All he talked about were joints and the joint sequences of these throwers and how they can improve or be more efficient with their joint coordination. So I sculled and rowed for 20 plus years, and none of my coaches talked about joints, always muscles. And I would bet maybe some of your coaches are similar. So at any rate, hopefully that saying the same thing, but with a different frame of reference for how you're moving in the boat. Next, use a wide range of tools to evaluate your movement. This is inspired by an unnamed GRP athlete at Craftsbury, who I won't name, but I asked how their their session went, and they had their speed coach. This individual had his speed coach around his neck, and before, how was your session? He picked up his speed coach and looked at his speed coach. That was how this very talented and very skilled sculler evaluated his session, looking at the speed coach to see how he had done. I would encourage, and I try and use an expansive kind of menu of ways to evaluate. This first one is inspired by Rick Rickey, who talks frequently about the stern wake. I was sculling along one day and Rick encouraged me. He said, try to go straight. And that seemed like an interesting idea and an interesting way to encourage me to move in the boat. And I just watched the stern wake and tried to make the stern wake as straight as I possibly could. And wouldn't you know it, I felt like I was sculling really well. And I was sculling what I thought very, very nicely. Rick then encouraged me to scull as quietly as possible. This second point of trying to use the decibel meter to evaluate your movement. Scull as quietly as possible. And as soon as I quieted down, again, lo and behold, the boat was moving sweetly. And that was verified by my speed coach. Two different tools of evaluation that I don't typically use. Trying to keep the stern wake straight, trying to keep the boat quiet, and wouldn't you know it, again, the boat felt awesome. It felt wonderful. On the speed coach, people typically only use the pace, or maybe not only, but they rely heavily on the pace. If you're using a speed coach, make sure you look at the distance per stroke metric as well. It is saying the same thing, but much as my previous point of joints versus muscles, it gives you a different perspective on that information. So how far you're traveling per each stroke. On the erg, we cycle between the three different measures, pace, calories, and watts, frequently. You can just change your perspective on how you're moving, whether it's the erg or the boat. And I think the diversity of those evaluative tools can really offer some new insight into how your boat is moving. So hopefully you explore those and other possibilities. Brakes, this next point, brakes are good. This is inspired by a dear friend who also will go nameless, who is a absolute like hair on fire, alpha charger, like fast is the only way to go. Lovely guy. I've enjoyed working with him and sculling with him through the years, but to him, brakes are like anathema to everything that we do. I disagree passionately with that. Brakes are good. And there are many people, whether they're guys on my team or this individual who's a very high level sculler, who refuse to incorporate brakes into their workout. I use them for not only just productive rest, but to reset and to refresh during a workout. One of the bodies of water that I use is the Rainbow Reservoir. It's a beautiful dammed section of the Farmington River in Connecticut. And our launch site is not quite, but about midway of this stretch of water. So from the launch, you go 3K up and you need to turn. You can go 5K down, you need to turn, 5K back up, turn, 3K in. You've got a nice 16K steady state session. And those breaks improve my sessions. Taking the time to wipe sweat from my hand, or to stretch my butt and to stretch my back, or to readjust. It's not weak. And I think that is often the perception. It's not inefficient. I think that's often the perception. It can improve the quality of your strokes if you have the right, I think, mental framing for it. Take your moment when you spin or when you pause, reset, refresh, and take those next few strokes with all of that energy and that kind of reset idea, and they could be wonderful, wonderful strokes. This one may not apply to you. You may already take strokes or take breaks, which is great. But oftentimes, and this may be, I don't know, exclusive to the college guys in large part, but it's hard to get them to slow down and to take breaks. Do so. Find this next one, find new mantras. You may already actively cultivate mantras for yourself. They are a critical avenue for me to go through workouts, whether it's an interval workout and my body is on fire, or it's a 20K paddle. Using mantras, I encourage, if you're already doing it, great, do more. If you're not, find your mantra. This first one where I write, find your own Dory, just keep sculling. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and the movie Finding Dory, I find great inspiration from, as does my 7-year-old daughter. But in that movie, if you're familiar with it at all, the title character has a mantra, just keep swimming. And she repeats it through this lovely Disney adventure where everything works out in the end. I was on the water about 2 weeks ago, went downstream farther than I should have. The tide turned, so incoming tide against a huge north wind, so rough water, headwind, and I was kicking myself. I started getting quite, I don't know, I just got kind of angry in the boat. My sculling went to pot. And then that mantra popped into my head. Just keep sculling, just keep sculling. And then it got me through about 9K back to the boathouse through that water and that headwind. The mantra was great. So cultivate your own, and I really encourage it a lot. Larry Gluckman, who I referenced earlier, he was my predecessor at Trinity. I worked for him for 3 years. One of his real stock technical calls was ease the knees. And Troy, was that a pretty good impression? That was all right, right? Ease the knees. Larry would say that maybe 5 or 6 times a practice. He was referencing ease the knees to make sure that guys were thoughtful and careful in their recovery movements. Ease the knees pops into my head 30 times a workout, all the time. And I have now said it and used it as a mantra tens of thousands of times. It continues to morph, and it continues to have its original meaning, but also adopt new meanings for me as I use it over and over and over again. Whatever it is, I really encourage you to think about what repetitive, affirmative, technically positive mantras you can use in your sculling and to really embrace them. This last point, Peter Graves, do something a little bit reckless every session. Not technically a mantra, I know that, but Peter is a 9-time national team member. He's a Trinity grad, Craftsbury alum, and he moved to the Hartford area about 2 years ago. So we've been able to, we are friends, we train together from time to time. Peter is an amazing sculler. He's a great guy. But Peter, every single day, does something a little bit reckless, which I fully endorse. Whether it's like a sprint to the dock to see who can get there first in the last 20 strokes, or just lifting the rate at any point during a workout, his enthusiasm, not only is it infectious, but it's also really positive. It's additive to my sculling, to the sessions that I do with him. It is just this unbridled enthusiasm that when I'm sculling, I really try to think of Peter from time to time, especially when it gets challenging and when it gets tough. I'm just like, attack it, go and have fun, do something a little bit reckless. And, you know, it's usually really, really positive and fun to do that during a session. Sorry, I have 2 more points and then I'm eager to answer any questions that may have come in. These deal with a couple of ideas that I've thought of in post practice, post rowing. And the first is to perform routine maintenance on your shell and your body. Again, this may be something you already do. It may be something that Craftsbury got you in the habit of because Erica was so good at making, and the interns were so good at making you care for the equipment. I really like going through the boat and wiping the tracks after a session and wiping the sill of the oarlock, of wiping the screw on the oarlock, certainly wiping the boat down. But I really try and get the guys on the team to care for the equipment a little bit more than they normally do. Just the act of cleaning the boat with care, I think is reflective of kind of your investment with that boat. A lot of the times we do just put the boat back on the rack. We do just put the oars back on the rack. But those few moments of just real precision and care, I think is important. I'm inspired by a movie, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which many of you may know. High recommend if you haven't seen it. But the entire movie is about precision and preparing and executing with precision. This point, I mention it just because I see it overlooked and neglected often. Boats are just put back on racks. Oars are just stowed away. Those little moments of care matter. And then for our bodies, for ourselves after a row, sometimes it's by necessity. You have to get to work. You have to get to class. You don't have time to cool down and stretch out. If you have the time, if you have the opportunity, high endorse. That's not, anything groundbreaking, but my sculling, it has really been helped by having the time to take a cool down and to stretch and to really kind of debrief after a workout. And then finally, another familiar one, learn a new joint movement sequence. I've for many, many years have recommended people brush their teeth with their non-dominant hand, and without fail have been entertained by people's reports of how successful they were when they tried to brush their teeth with their non-dominant hand. Some people are able to do it without too much trouble. Others can't find their teeth when they brush with their non-dominant hand. If you haven't tried it, please try it. If toothbrushing isn't your, you don't want to try that, try throwing a tennis ball or a baseball with your non-dominant hand, a frisbee, using your fork and your knife in your non-dominant hand, in the non-traditional way that you pick it up. Recently, I was in my backyard repairing and repainting my fence. I tried for a short while to use a screwdriver with my non-dominant hand and was flustered. It's very humbling to think of how dexterous you can be in your joint and your fine motor skills with one hand, and how lummoxy you can be with your other hand. Learning those new joint movement sequences with your non-dominant hand, I have found it has informed my sculling very positively, where I think about the balance of my body. I think about my fine motor skill, not quite being equal by any stretch, but by trying my neuromuscular system to use both of my hands and encourage and not encourage, to hone and cultivate that fine motor skill. And then finally, learning a new dynamic movement. I've known how to jump rope for a long time, but I've been jump roping a ton. The rhythm, the coordination, the using it as a warm-up and an aerobic opener, it's wonderful. So high endorse for jump roping, and then juggling. I first saw Hank Osborne juggling in a boat in 2003, my first summer at Craftsbury, and I said, I want to figure out how to do that. And so was inspired by Hank juggling in the boat. Juggling can be learned, and I taught a group of Trinity undergraduates within a week. If you dedicate maybe 15 minutes a day, you can learn to juggle really quickly. And just like jump roping, rhythm, coordination, movement, the kind of meditative, repetitive motion of it, I really find a lot of joy and a lot of efficacy in its translation to my sculling from movements like that. So that is all in terms of my kind of formal part of the presentation. I, again, Troy, hope that kind of matched with the webinar ideas that you and I talked about, from presenting as we do at the center. And yeah, hope that at least one or two of those were helpful to people out there in the Zoomosphere. So Erica, I guess I have not been paying attention to the questions at all, but are there questions, or how do I see the questions?
I'll just read them for you, and
Great.
then we can go in that order. So I've been making a list of them in the order I've been getting them. And anyone, as we're going through answering questions, you can keep sending them to me if you'd like. But I think I'll start actually with one of the most recent questions, which John Holt sent in the chat to everybody, which is sort of a more general topic, which he said, I would like to ask a purposefully simple and open-ended question. When you think about getting better, what are the objective or subjective measures you like to consider? Going faster is an obvious answer, a good answer, and a hard answer to ignore, but it may not be the only answer.
Sure, that's a great question. In setting goals, for a college team, the objective ones are really pretty simple. Having standards for kind of your gold medal standards for where you need to be from an objective measure in your pace and working towards those. I think more subjectively, the goals for improvement come back to that idea of comfort in the boat. Kind of writ large, I have an idea of what a boat should feel like, in terms of balance, in terms of movement, stroke to stroke. So just from that idea of comfort in the boat, in my frequency, the more I get into the boat, the more I explore the boat, the the range of motion and my physical wherewithal within the boat, those measures, I think, inform how comfortable I feel balancing and moving with grace and moving with ease. I don't know if that kind of answers the question, but those are the subjective measures that I personally tend to focus on.
There was one more recent question, which I think will be pretty quick. And then I think what I'll do is I'll start going the questions kind of in the slide order as people were referring to your slides. But this quick one is just what to wipe tracks with.
What do I wipe tracks with? On a daily basis, simple green, diluted about 30-1. So very, very little simple green. I think there are other products like it, but yeah, I just splash of simple green in a bucket, a rag, and just a really simple solution. That if I try and do it regularly, so there's not a lot of buildup, or it doesn't call for anything heavier duty than that. So yeah, just daily maintenance. Simple green is great. I think it's fairly environmentally friendly. At least that's how it's marketed. So I use that, and we use a lot of it. So, yeah.
Okay, so going back earlier, this was one of your first slides, I believe. Someone asked if you have any advice on how to create workout plans or adapt existing ones.
Absolutely. Troy, I'm not sure how to answer this quickly. I would refer, Norm was an incredibly important person for me and for Troy as well. So I like that 3-block structure. Larry, as I mentioned before, his background, he had a master's in education. And so he would do it almost like a lesson plan for a classroom, minute by minute, as I said. Those 3 blocks, having your warm up and your drill work, that's really informed by what you want to work on. Very recently, I was trying to focus on the release. So my drill work during that warm-up block focused on the release. As I mentioned, I was doing the release pick drill. I did a lot of half feather work where I would only feather the blade halfway coming out of the water. A little bit of square blade work, but not too much of that. And that first phase focused on my technical goal, my technical objective. The middle block, a lot of my workouts I get from Concept 2 Workout of the Day. I don't know if other people sign up for that newsletter, but I get the ski erg workout of the day. It's usually great. If I have time to do the long, the Concept 2, it's broken up into short, medium, and long, depending on how much time you have to do. So the medium or the long, I'll usually throw that into that second block for my workout. And then for the kind of cool down or third block, that's usually a 5 to 10 minute section at the end of a workout where I will hearken back to the first block, make sure I'm sculling easily and with, hopefully some good technical execution, but really bringing the speed down and coming into the dock with a positive mindset and hopefully really good boat movement. That was an attempt at a short but somewhat comprehensive answer, I hope.
It's a very broad question, so I think
yeah,
that's fair.
But it's a wonderful question and worthy of, I think it's a.
Yeah, someone just suggested in the chat that we make it a topic for a future webinar, so maybe we can delve into that. Semi-connected, I keep saying I'm going to go back to the beginning, but this was also more recent. Jenny Kiesling asked, what would you tell one of the college athletes you coach who thinks that he will get better by doing a 100K erg piece?
Hi, Jenny. First of all, nice to see you. I would tell them that that's an ambitious workout. I think from a achievement and the the fortitude that it takes to do 100K, I applaud, and I really think that's quite an achievement. It would not fit into my training plan. I would say that, doing 100K on an erg, again, is wonderful stuff to maybe knock off the bucket list, but you can spend your time developing cardiorespiratory efficiency without doing 100K, breaking up your workouts so that you're working in the appropriate zone with the appropriate lactate, at the appropriate lactate level, at the appropriate respiration level, and 100K, I don't know that I would include that in a workout. You can you can use your time a little bit more efficiently just from a training efficacy standpoint. But doing 100K, it takes some real gumption to do that. So maybe from that perspective, it's really productive, and I applaud. But yeah, I would say that's not a smart use of your time, I think, would be my answer. I tried to cage it. If people do 100Ks, that's great. I don't want to get in trouble on a Craftsbury webinar.
Okay, so there were a whole bunch of questions that came in when you were talking about handles.
Yes.
So I think these can all probably be pretty quick answers, but one person asked, speaking of handles, for those of us who are using club equipment, do you have any thoughts for wraps or things that can help with using sculling oars and preventing slipping, sweaty hands?
For slippery, sweaty hands, this is, I should have included this. Ketil Borch, the Norwegian sculler, wears wristbands. And I noticed this in pictures that he's always wearing sweatbands on his wrist. They have helped me tremendously because I sweat a lot. So I full endorse of old school, just wristbands. I think, Troy, you might wear wrists as well.
Time.
Yeah. They have helped me tremendously in this hot, humid, recent weather that we've had in Connecticut, avoid kind of like sweaty swamp palm and real trouble moving the oar handles. In terms of like if there's water splashing on the oars, that wristbands they don't really help in that regard. We have had people at Craftsbury who have retrofitted Concept 2 oars with a croaker style handle, which I think, some people have really liked that croaker style grip and handle. So I know that is a product. And then finally, we did have people who, I'm not sure if it was a standard tennis grip, but they would actually wrap their sculling handles. They bought from Concept 2 the most narrow handle, and then would build up with a tennis grip. And that sculler has come to Craftsbury many times and is a very skilled and experienced sculler. So hopefully some ideas there. You're on mute, Erica. Sorry.
Sorry, somebody walked behind me. Okay, so the next question about handles. Do you think that one gets more dexterity with thinner handles than thick ones?
I certainly feel that. The closest that I have to a objective study was something that was sent to me about the diameter of chin-up bars and the ability of individuals to grip pull-up bars with strength and comfort. So absolutely, the size of the handle should fit your comfort. If you're in a club, maybe you can experiment cleaning each handle with different sized handles. I have normal, I don't know, from, I guess a fairly large hand, but about 6'1", and I use the smallest diameter, the smallest handle. I find that most comfortable. I really love how it feels in my hand. Quick anecdote, a sculler who was a national team level sculler was having really regular incidents of fire paw, which is it's a cramping and a kind of inflammation of your forearm, your tendons, your whole handle and grip, where you really lose all ability to handle and manipulate the oars. So this was happening regularly. Going to a smaller handle cleared that up. That sculler had been using just a little bit too large a grip. So under real extreme racing conditions, like full max speed, was getting that fire paw. Going to a smaller handle was really important in terms of that sculler's development. So there's no stock answer. Experiment, and I think you'll find a handle that works well for you.
Awesome. And I think that basically answers the next question that I had written for handles. So we'll go ahead to the next topic. Someone asked, while you were talking about how important it is to take breaks, if you have any advice for what you should think about or ask yourself during those breaks, during the pauses?
The first thing I do is stretch. I will answer the question, but the first thing I do, I take my feet out of the shoes and do one of these, like pull. Yeah, I mean, I'm just starting the back nine here, but I get really tight in the boat now. So stretching is the first thing, and that gives me a small break. I try to then mentally, like, resetting for the next piece. I try to think of what I've done well. So that idiom of like carrying a big basket, no matter what session I'm doing, no matter what I'm doing on the water, like I can find something that I've done well. And I really try when I restart to not maximize that, but that's my point of focus. Man, I was really feeling really strong connection to the water. My balance was a little bit off during the recovery. All right. But wow, my blades felt really anchored and connected to the water. So let me start this next section of work with that thought and improve and build upon that. This is especially prevalent when you're doing intervals. So, you're knocking out 500-meter pieces or 1,000-meter pieces, and you are midway through, taking a moment to assess not only your speed and not only your pace, but also just like, what are you doing well? What can you build upon? And having that positive framing to address the challenges you're facing, I think can be productive.
I think that segues quite well into the next question, which is on your mantras slide. And so Karen Zareski asks, she said she would welcome additional strategies or mantras you have found useful for type A's who need help reframing the unhelpful temptation to compare themselves to others who are making quicker progress.
Ooh, great one. Every mantra that I have developed, whatever, like, it's usually organically inspired and it's always very simple. I'll get to the part about being self-critical and the self-judgment. But the other day, the mantra that I was kind of had for most of this workout was close and open. So meaning, like, during the recovery, just close up and open, close and open. Forgive my rudimentary demonstration of sculling there. Simple, but just in terms of like closing my body and then opening was taking really enjoyable strokes. In terms of comparing myself to other people, that has improved with age. I don't necessarily or can't recommend a concrete tactic to address it, but I just, it kind of goes to being precious about my sculling, or, you know, I know that when I am self-critical, my rowing stinks. When I am like judging stroke to stroke, or, you know, I have to convince myself, like, and I know I'm not going to take good strokes. So for me, it's usually anger. I'll admit on this very public platform that, like, if I'm rowing with like real anger, which happens with frequency, my strokes usually aren't that good. And it's a kind of natural thing that happens if I'm competing against somebody else, or I'm banging out really hard intervals. That's not a productive emotion for me to transfer into the boat. I thought it was for many years when I was a younger athlete. Now I try and recognize that that's what I'm feeling, and reframe it as something more positive. Reframe it as something that, you know, that makes me feel a little bit more, I don't know, more positive about my sculling. You know, that's usually the negative emotion that I feel in my sculling over the last maybe 5 years or so.
Okay, so I think this is almost a related question, but maybe from a different perspective, which is from Catherine Imboden asking, we're in a time of uncertainty. As a sculler in my 70s, I am experiencing for the first time a loss of confidence in my sculling. Entering and exiting the shell in a strong current has led to some trepidation. She's wondering if you have any advice on how to confront this and to kick that apprehension and look forward positively to training sessions.
Yeah. I would answer, we have such a huge range of people who attend Craftsbury, and there is no right or wrong way to scull. I firmly and confidently believe that however you get in the shell is right. However you exit the shell is right. However you move the shell is right. The safety aspect, that's a challenge. So at camp, we have the interns and the coaches and everyone who may be there to help support somebody who needs additional assistance to enter and launch and scull safely. But just know that there's no right or wrong way to get into a boat. You get in however you get in. If it means sitting on the dock and scooting your butt across the gunnel onto the seat, that's what you do. And we've had people at Craftsbury who apologize for that. No need to ever, apologize or be self-critical. The safety aspect, other people being there is an obvious answer to help support all of those logistical moments in the boat that are kind of critical and potentially dangerous. But do not judge and do not worry ever. If you can do a standing shove, bully for you. That's great. If you get in the boat by scooting your butt over, that's just as good and just as positive. That safety aspect, I'm not certain how to address additionally, but other people, I think, is the only answer that I can think of now.
So, question from Dan Jablonski. He says he is basically doing intervals on a 500-meter canal behind his house, and he is wondering if you have any recommendations for switching things up on such a short body of water.
Whew. Use a bungee and add some serious resistance to slow yourself down. That can extend bodies of water. That's a fairly common coaching methodology kind of answer or tactic. The increase in drag and resistance is kind of not controversial. I think coaches have various opinions on the efficacy of rowing with high drag. or low drag. I tend to think doing both and rowing with very high resistance and very low resistance is equally beneficial for athletes in their development. I think the other suggestion, if you're not already doing so, rowing very low rate, like seeing how low, you know, if you can row 10 strokes a minute or 12 strokes a minute, that you can have that body of water like extended-ish in your sculling. You know, in 500 meters, see how few strokes it takes you to cover that body of water, which is an old Joe Burke at Penn, one of their staple drills back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. They would see on these very well-marked and known stretches of the SCULL how few strokes it would take them to cover that distance. I did see a question pop up about how to lower resistance. Sorry, that was related to that answer. So not to usurp your question
You're good.
asking, Erica.
You're good.
But lowering resistance with the rigging. So on the erg, it's just the flywheel, but I will have myself and athletes that I work with row at a 10 and row at a 1 and row at everything in between. The kind of resistance you can play with, and it requires different, I think, attention from the athlete depending on what you're doing. In the boat, it's done through rigging. So if you want very quick lowering of resistance, you make those adjustments in the oars, shortening the overall oar length, extending the inboard. If you want a more extensive switch of lowering resistance in the boat, you manipulate the pins, which is more involved, but you can lower resistance in the rigging on the boat. And then increasing the resistance, bungee is the most simple way to wrap a rope or a bungee around the boat. And then they have aftermarket products that you can, they're like cylinders and basically like a bucket almost that you drag behind the boat that offers resistance the other way to increase resistance.
So I think we're going to try to wrap up soon. I think I'm going to go with 2 more questions, which I did get earlier. So one of them from Steve Hayes.
Hi, Steve.
And I believe he asked this at the end of right at the end of Troy's talk last week, so he didn't get it in. So I want to make sure we get to it.
Is it about the sculler's catch?
No, he wants to know the best way to emergency stop. I think it's a safety issue on the lake he's sculling on.
Yeah. Well, first, hi, Steve, and I wish you and your family the best. For emergency stopping, I mean, we do practice this, maybe not as regularly as we should, but in an 8, like slamming the oars in square and checking down hard, like emergency stop, you know, having that skill. Back in 2008 and 9 and 10, we had crews racing at Redwood Shores in California, and that body of water is like 2,005 meters long. I mean, it's like you cross the finish line and hit the brakes hard. And it involves, you know, practicing squaring your blade and with as smooth and as quick a motion as possible, getting the blade to dig into the water evenly, starboard and port, to emergency halt your boat. One of the problems is that the oar handle comes back at your rib cage. So if you're in an 8 and you're going at 45 strokes per minute in the last 50 meters of a race and you hit the brakes, it's pretty violent, and it's a pretty dramatic event. In a single, you know, I think it is a good thing to practice where you are sculling along, you set yourself at the release with your legs flat, your body as supported as possible, square the blades as close to full square as possible, and just try to lift your hands to dig the blades into the water and halt the progress of the boat as quickly as possible.
Okay, so we'll make this the final question, which is a technical question about the finish or the release part of the stroke. George Bingham said, in sweep, one speaks of the tap down to get the blade out of the water before the feather. Do you think of a tap down in the sculling stroke? And does the lift of the blade originate with the elbows, the forearm, the wrist?
It originates with all. I think of the weight of my hands, the weight of my forearm, providing the movement of the handle to release the blade from the water and for the initial movement of the recovery. The visual I have in my head is a Nike swoosh. I've heard coaches talk about a lowercase j, or there's one other reference that's escaping me, but a Nike swoosh. I think that it is a very smooth, a very rounded, and a very minimal movement in sculling to release the blade. And that image of like a reverse Nike swoosh right around my rib cage provides me with, and it's a small swoosh, not a big one, very small symbol right around my rib cage, that my thumb, the top of my hand, and the weight of my forearm provide the movement of the handle to achieve and to accomplish. I do think the equipment is quite different, sweep to scull. So it's a different answer, slightly, not enormously, but slightly different answer in sweep rowing based on the size and the length of the blade and the handle. They're very similar, but there are substantive differences between the sculling handle and the sweep handle. And simply, I would say the magnitude is just increased in the sweep handle, which is my short and simple answer.
Awesome. I think, well, thank you for your time, and maybe we'll turn it over to Troy to talk about the next week.
Yes. Shoot. I'm sorry. I have to restore my screen. Where am I? Rick is going to be our presenter next week, and I actually don't know his topic.
He told me he'd get it to me by tomorrow morning, but maybe we can tease a little bit about the video footage, maybe.
Well, yeah, in his Parnassian way, he's being mysterious, and I think that just heightens the suspense, because you know, if it's Rick, it's going to be thoughtful and unusual and outside the box. And yeah, he'll get his PowerPoint to you, and then we'll get a précis up on the website. But it will be entertaining and enlightening, and I promise you, it will make you think. So he has a video clip. It's actually it's a composite of 3 video clips of Thomas Lange that he had the Conn College IT department or he actually put it on a VHS tape for him and loop it so that he can show it on an endless loop. And this VHS tape has been around for 15 years or so. And the IT guy that did it for him has retired or left Conn College somehow. So he can't digitize it. So we're having one of the GRP athletes digitize it for him. So not to disparage Rick as a Luddite, but he was in a little bit of a panic this morning because he wasn't sure how he was going to get this short video clip of Thomas Lange up. But we'll have that resolved for him as well.
Yeah.
Well, Troy, thank you for the opportunity to do this, and I hope for all the attendees there were a couple of ideas that struck you. So. My contact information is on the website and on the Trinity College website as well. So if anybody wants any follow-up correspondence, be happy to connect.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Awesome.
Good second webinar, and we look forward to Rick's next week.
Great.
Thank you. Thank everyone for coming.
Thank you.